So the United States insists it is pursuing peace with Iran, but through a strategy of, quote, negotiating with bombs. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth warned what he calls Iran's new regime to come to the table or face continued attacks.
If Iran is wise, they will cut a deal. President Trump doesn't bluff and he does not back down. You can ask Khomeini about that. The new Iranian regime should know that by now. This new regime, because regime change has occurred, should be wiser than the last. President Trump will make a deal he is willing, and the terms of the deal are known to them. If Iran is not willing, then the United States War Department will continue with even more intensity.
A large fireball lit up the night sky in the Iranian city of Isfaham overnight. The US military bombed what's reported to have been a major underground missile and ammunition storage facility. Iran also carried out attacks on Israel. In Tel Aviv, 9 people were injured by falling debris from missile interceptions. Large plumes of black smoke could be seen across the city. Meanwhile, Iranian drones and missile attacks continue to strike countries across the Gulf. A Kuwaiti oil tanker anchored in Dubai was hit in an apparent Iranian drone strike earlier on Tuesday. We're live in Tehran, in Ramallah, and Riyadh. But first, let's head to the White House in Washington, D.C. and speak to Al Jazeera's chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher. So, Alan, did we glean any more about how the U.S. are framing their war on Iran and any potential negotiations?
Well, certainly they're clear that any peace deal will be done on Donald Trump's terms, and they're willing to increase the military pressure to try and get Iran to the table. Pete Hegseth said that. He said the talks are real, that they are progressing, but he said we can continue to negotiate with bombs, something he said twice during that news conference, making clear that they are willing to continue the bombardment of Iran. And we know that from the White House down, no one here is ruling out the idea of US troops on the ground. Now, whether that would be on Karg Island, whether it be to do something to protect the Strait of Hormuz, that isn't entirely clear. But that's understandable at this point, because no one from the White House down is going to start flagging what they're going to do on a strategic level. So the talks are progressing, but the troops are moving into the area as well. Pete Hegseth says that the United States has achieved most of its aims. It's destroyed the Iranian Navy. It has destroyed the
Well, and thanks for that, Alan Fisher, there outside the White House. Well, Iran says a major pharmaceutical manufacturing facility in Tehran was hit in US-Israeli strikes. The Tawfiq Daru Engineering Research Company produced specialized medicines, and this includes antibiotics and indeed drugs for cancer treatment. Iran's domestic pharmaceutical companies are critical to the nation's healthcare system, which has been hurt by decades of international sanctions. Let's cross to Ali Hashim, live for us in Tehran. So, Ali, the US saying they're happy, as we've been hearing, to cut a deal, at the same time continuing the assault on the country. And what does that mean specifically for people living under this shadow of ongoing war?
Well, given the fact the few days remaining in President Trump's deadline to Iran and the Iranian-American exchange over the negotiations, President Trump saying they are talking to the Iranians denying, and then we knowing that there's a certain layer going through the Pakistanis. Now we have on the table a new initiative, a new player, the Chinese-Pakistani initiative for cessation of hostilities between Iran and the United States. Probably the Iranians would be happy to see the Chinese because they're looking for an international guarantor, a state with the power to impose or to force any kind of a deal that could be reached. Iranians say they are open for a deal, but depending or based on their own understanding to how this conflict should end. It should end completely. There should be guarantees it's not going to be repeated, and most importantly, it should end on all fronts. Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, everywhere. And this is what the Iranians are saying, especially also they're adding that they should have their own sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz recognized. Now, with all what's going on and the daily attacks that we are witnessing here in Iran, actually, despite President Trump's extended deadline, we've seen several attacks on power facilities, whether here in Tehran, where there was
to Nora Day now, who's following developments in Israel from near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. And Nor, for Israel, it seems there is no deadline for this war.
No deadline for sure, and the only thing that the Israeli Prime Minister wants to put across is the fact that Israel and the U.S. are achieving a lot of strides in their bombardment campaign against Iran. He's been speaking to Newsmax, and this is some of what he had to say.
How many weeks do you think it would be to accomplish that 100% mark?
I don't put a schedule on it. I think we've achieved a lot of things, a lot of things. We really degraded this regime, really hit them very hard. So it's definitely beyond the halfway point. But I don't want to put a schedule on it.
But is it a problem that you think
is... But beyond halfway in terms of missions, not necessarily in terms of time. I don't want to get into schedules.
Right.
Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu's declared goal at the beginning of the war was collapsing the regime, changing it altogether, not just the people at the helm, but he would not contradict the U.S. president in the public or in the media, and his local critics in Israel would say that Benjamin Netanyahu wouldn't also do an interview with critical media, preferring always to talk to U.S. media that the U.S. president watches.
All right, Nora, thanks for that. Nora Day there in Ramallah. So now the Emir of Qatar is in the United Arab Emirates. Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani and UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed discussed the war in Iran and developments in the region. This comes a day after the Emir visited Riyadh for talks with the Saudi Crown Prince and the King of Jeddah. And Qatar's foreign ministry says it's ready to help with any future negotiations to end the war.
Qatar is not involved in these talks. Our views about any talks, if they exist, are consistent with our very principled position that all conflicts will end on the negotiation table, and we support all of these efforts. I'm not privy to the details of the current negotiations, but we stand ready to help, of course, if there is any role for Qatar.
Let us cross to Riyadh. The Saudi capital, Russell Serda, is standing by for us there. And Russell, clearly a very important discussions taking place across the Gulf over the last couple of days. What's the degree of coordination amongst Gulf states?
Indeed, so for many, the degree of the coordination among the GCC countries is not sufficient, and that they support the diplomacy, but there are nuances. Still, there are divergences in their approaches. Saudi Arabia is increasingly referring to the right of self-defense and the possibility of the retaliation if Iran's attacks continue. Then the you see Qatar particularly insisting on the diplomacy, saying that is the only way to solve the problem, and any armed conflict must end at the negotiating table, and the further escalation is going to be devastating for the region. On the other hand, we see Emiratis, so recently particularly the high-level officials are adopting a more hawkish, a more harsh approach toward Iran, clearly calling Iranian system as a terrorist regime, and also asking the Arab and the regional countries, the GCC countries particularly, to adopt a harsher stance toward Iran. So now, everyone agrees that the region, GCC countries, are at a crossroad, whether they are going to unify their position, their policies, the security policies, the economic policies, or whether they are going to be further apart away from each other. And not to allow that, so the Qatari Emir yesterday was in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, meeting the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And then today he went to Abu Dhabi, meeting the President of United Arab Emirates. Just let's remember, in recent months, the Saudi government has bombed the pro-Emirati forces in Yemen, and there are soured relations. However, many believe that indeed this crisis could be an opportunity for GCC to come out as a unified, as a united bloc. But now it is quite unclear whether they are going to be able to further unify or whether the frictions are going to grow.
Russell, thanks for that. Russell Serdar reporting there. Now then, China and Pakistan are proposing a 5-point path to end the Iran war and restore stability across the Middle East. The country's foreign ministers have called for a ceasefire and an immediate end to military action. They're calling for peace talks to be held as soon as possible, and that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran and Gulf countries should be safeguarded. Both nations have also urged the US, Israel and Iran to halt attacks on civilians and to respect international humanitarian law. They've also called for safe passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz and urging on all countries to respect the UN Charter and to work towards reaching an agreement for establishing lasting peace. Let's get into this with Hassan Ahmadian, who's an associate professor at the University of Tehran, and also Abdullah Bandar Al-Tabi, who's an assistant professor in international affairs at Qatar University. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Hassan, could I start with you? So China and Pakistan issuing these 5 proposals, including ceasing hostilities, initiating peace talks ASAP, as soon as possible, and safety of navigation. Isn't that a basis at least for negotiations to start? If the US agreed to talk on that basis, shouldn't Iran follow suit?
I think so. I don't see why Iran would object to that. I think the Iranians have made it clear during the past few years that they are up for, in for a discussion or negotiations. Remember, 2 times they were negotiating when they were attacked. And I think this proposal is basically, going back to negotiations, not initiating anything new when it comes to Iranian mindset. So I think they would welcome it, but it basically comes in times when the United States, it seems, is escalating to change the balance of military balance of threat between the 2 sides, to change that and then translate it into leverage on the table. That's what the Iranians are eyeing with more seriousness than these steps, though they would welcome these steps because they see themselves in a comfortable position at this point with the balance that exists to go for a settlement.
Okay, Abdullah, we've seen a lot of Gulf diplomacy happening, not least from the Emir of Qatar, who was in Saudi yesterday, the UAE today. And the message from the Qataris is one of de-escalation and negotiation, so presumably they would thoroughly back these proposals.
Well, all the regional actors, they are pushing for the same thing, de-escalation. Everyone who's reasonable wants to have an end to this war, because this is a war that's bringing more chaos, more instability to the region, and how not only Qatar, but all the regional countries, they are seeing it. But the thing is, this war and these Iranian attacks against neighboring countries are not giving a chance for neutral mediators to jump in, because everybody is focused at defending themselves and defending their sovereignty. And this is keeping Iran more isolated in the region. But at the same time, you want an end. So you have to rebuild trust with Iran and rebuilding trust between Iran and the US. And this is a major thing. What I see it in the region, that's the Gulf countries, and you see more from Qatar, Saudi, Jordan now, even Turkey. We're seeing as like hegemon projects are coming together. They're colliding and they want to bring the GCC and the region as a whole as a battlefield. And this is something
But is the region coordinated? Because we've had these reports over the last few days suggesting that there is some division, and some Gulf nations are suggesting that the US needs to finish the job.
Well, the thing is, these are reports. Like, it's hard to comment on reports that are not linked to official statements from countries. What we have seen so far, that all regional countries, at least they want stability, at least they want de-escalation, at least they want an end to this war, because this is just more chaotic for the whole region. And as you see, even these conditions at Strait of Hormuz, you're seeing Iran is acting like it's belonging to them, and this is actually putting not only the region, but putting all the global interests, all the energy at risk. And this is a major violation to the international law, and this is a major violation to even the basic principles of good neighboring. So how we see it so far in the region, I think the region at least having one word, which is stability, and that's the policy they are moving forward with.
Hassan, as you alluded to, in Iran's favor, you've got two things. It's current control of the Strait of Hormuz, and then the fact that Iran's military resilience has surprised everybody, and not least the United States and Israel to a large degree. But Iran is still vulnerable, isn't it, as the US military campaign intensifies, as we've been seeing over the last 24 hours. Could Iran, at this point, accept that it needs a deal to prevent further wholesale destruction across the country?
Sure thing. As I said, it's Iran wants a settlement. It has been in negotiations to prevent this from happening, all while stating what unfolded in this war, that it will do such. It will widen the war. Because we have to remember, Iran is the weaker party in terms of armed forces. It's the underdog. It had to go asymmetric against its aggressors to force them out, to push back against their war efforts. And that's what it did. It was announced before the war. And now I think it feels that it's in a comfortable position because of the lever it built while shielding itself against attack. It built leverage. Abdullah was talking about the Strait of Hormuz and the legality of it. There's nothing legal about the entirety of this war, about the targets in Iran, about everything about this. So to single out the Strait as the illegal part, I think, is basically, we should put it in the context of the entirety of this war.
Abdullah, do you want to come back on that?
Well, it's, when you see it, it's not only the Strait of Hormuz. It's even illegal to attack civilian infrastructure in the GCC countries. I mean, when you attack my water, when you attack basically my ports, my airports, when you threaten to attack my civilian infrastructure, when you attack my energy as well. We talk about here not only Ras Laffan, we talk about Ras Tanura in Saudi Arabia, we talk about in Kuwait as well. So when these type of targets happen, they actually make it very difficult for the region to trust Iran as well. This is important. This is keeping Iran more isolated, but at the same time, we have to deal with it. Geography, we are all prisoners of geography. We have to deal with each other, no matter what. But for us to deal with each other, we need a context for that. We need some principles we agree on.
Sorry to jump in, but that's the thing, isn't it, Hassan? Because there may be a question of trust as far as Iran is concerned, as far as the US is concerned. But there's also, as far as Gulf countries are concerned, there's a lack of trust on Iran.
Of course, trust is a two-way street. The Iranians don't trust their neighbors at this point. Not all their neighbors. Iran is neighbor to 15 countries. But the 5 countries that President Trump named as part of or supporting the war efforts, 3 times he mentioned them. These Iranians look at as part of the aggression on Iran. And so when civilian infrastructure in Iran are hit, Iranians, in order to balance that off, in order to push back against it, in order to shield themselves against further escalation on civilian infrastructure, they go against the similar targets in Israel, but also in the region, because they don't have that much of a balanced military capability to push back against the United States itself, but its infrastructure, that is the CENTCOM infrastructure, that is waging the Southern War. Iran views this war as 2 wars, one from Israel, one from the south, from the United States. And so in pushing back against them, similar targets are being hit. Now, of course, there is lack of trust in both ways.
Okay.
GCC doesn't trust Iran.
Hassan, I'm just going to jump in there because we're just running out of time. But Abdullah, finally come back on that.
Well, you have been waging a war against Iran, against the U.S. for years and years, with so many slogans about death to America and all the rest. So why are you involving the region? What it basically is doing is Iran is basically trying to frame this war as sharing the pain in the region, but the region itself and the regional countries themselves, they've worked really hard to prevent this war from the beginning. And they have done their best to do this. But when you see Iran launching all their attacks within less than an hour with Israeli attacks on Iran, you feel that this is a big betrayal, and this is a big problem that would lead to lots of work between countries and regional countries to rebuild this trust, because it's a trust need to be built, not only governments. We talk about Iranian people and the GCC citizens as well.
Gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Do appreciate your time. So many issues, so many complexities, but thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Israel's Defense Minister, Israel Katz, says homes in southern Lebanon will be demolished and hundreds of thousands of displaced Lebanese will not be allowed to return. This is as the military continues to occupy the area. Around 600,000 Lebanese have been displaced from their homes south of the Litani River since Israel's war with Hezbollah began on March the 2nd. The river lies around 300 kilometers from the border with Israel. Katz says the Israeli military will continue to occupy the area even after the war ends to ensure the security of people in northern Israel.
At the end of the operation, the IDF will establish a security zone inside Lebanon on a defense line against anti-tank missiles and will maintain security control over the entire area up to the Litani, including the Litani bridges that will remain, while eliminating the Radwan forces that infiltrated the area and destroying all weapons found there. In addition, the return south of the Litani of over 600,000 residents of southern Lebanon who evacuated north will be strictly prohibited until the safety and security of the residents of the north is guaranteed. All houses in the villages near the border in Lebanon will be destroyed in accordance with the model of Rafah and Beit Hanun in Gaza, in order to remove once and for all the threats near the border from the residents of the north.
Beirut's southern suburbs were hit again on Tuesday, with Israel saying it's targeting infrastructure linked to Hezbollah. Israel's invasion of southern Lebanon and strikes across the country are forcing hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. The United Nations says more than 1 million Lebanese have been displaced since the escalation began earlier this month. 13,500 pregnant women are among those forced out of their homes. And of course, children have also been heavily affected, with more than 370,000 displaced in just 3 weeks. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation in Lebanon, warning of a humanitarian crisis if the conflict does not end soon.
Politicians in Israel now openly speak of the intention of an extended so-called security or buffer zone, with the destruction of villages along the Blue Line and several bridges across the Litani River.
A cycle of coercive displacement is unfolding. The message from communities here is painfully clear. They want safety, they want dignity, they want this to stop. They want to escape this cycle of crises. And they look to members of this council to heed these calls. We have often said that we cannot let Lebanon fail. Now is a real test of that promise. Lebanon is often said to be at breaking point, yet so often finds the resilience somehow to pull through. Now it is once again at breaking point.
So then you're watching Al Jazeera. Reminder of our top stories this hour. And the United States insists it is pursuing peace with Iran, but through a strategy of, quote, negotiating with bombs. Attacks have continued across Iran. The US military bombed what's reported to have been a major underground missile and ammunition storage facility in Isfaham. Iran also carried out attacks on Israel. In Tel Aviv, 9 people were injured by falling debris from missile interceptions. Large plumes of black smoke can be seen across the city. And Iranian drones and missile attacks continue to strike countries across the Gulf. A Kuwaiti oil tanker anchored in Dubai waters was hit in an apparent Iranian drone strike earlier on Tuesday. Well, Donald Trump and his team have been releasing mixed signals regarding what comes next in the Iran war. The Pentagon says unpredictability is part of its strategy. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says boots on the ground remain on the table as one of the many options.
We're not going to foreclose any option. You can't fight and win a war if you tell your adversary what you are willing to do or what you are not willing to do, to include boots on the ground. Our adversary right now thinks there are 15 different ways we could come at them with boots on the ground. And guess what? There are. So if we needed to, we could execute those options on behalf of the President of the United States and this department. Or maybe we don't have to use them at all. Maybe negotiations work, or maybe there's a different approach. But the point is to be unpredictable in that. Certainly not let anybody know what you're willing to do or not do.
Okay, let's assess the situation. Joining us in the studio, Alexandra Hudish-Tanu, who is a military defense analyst. Alexandra, great to have you with us. So on the one hand, we've got the US saying, let's negotiate, yet at the same time, upping the ante on the ground. How genuine do you think the United States are about negotiating, or is the point the unpredictability? We don't know.
I personally think it's the unpredictability factor here. We see already there are two tracks: the diplomatic track, which started roughly 1 week ago with a delay in the ultimatum, which repeated again up to the date of 6th. And at the same time, we see the military strike still continuing, and that's not necessarily an unusual fact. When two actors in war usually come up towards a negotiation, they will start with maximalist lists. And this maximalist list means they try at the same time to open up more military options to show to the other party that in case negotiation is not happening, there are other military options that will just raise more and more escalation. So there are military options that will lead to more devastation at the end.
So on that basis, one of those military options could be boots on the ground.
Yes.
And that may be just part of the negotiating tactic, is what you're saying.
Usually, in order for this to be credible, you do have to have these options credible. So if negotiation is to take place, even, the options that you show on the military side needs to be credible. So I think US is playing both aspects, both angles here.
Right.
They do have troops coming in the CENTCOM area of responsibility that are credible enough to have limited boots on the ground operation, or give this permission to the military commanders.
We don't want to speculate, but the thing is, with Trump, don't you kind of get the sense that if the troops are there, they will be utilized?
Trump is known to be bombastic somehow. This is my opinion in his messaging. At the same time, we had the Defense Secretary the Secretary of State Rubio saying yesterday that the strait will be open one way or another. So I would look at what Mr. Rubio said as a anchoring speech, and that doesn't necessarily equate to a military option or to a military progress of this option if negotiation actually happens.
All right, so Iran will be observing those gathering troops and will be making preparations. What kind of preparations, military preparations, would they be making to defend themselves?
First of all, Iran most likely has prepared in advance for this situation. Looking at the troops that US is bringing on the area of responsibility of CENTCOM, we're seeing specialized troops which are very good at assaulting land. So we're talking Marine Expeditionary Units, we're talking the Airborne Division, which are paratroopers, but the numbers don't support necessarily a large type operation, more like a limited one. So maybe I'm looking at islands, trying to force the entrance to the Hormuz, or maybe Karg Island.
All right, fascinating. We'll leave it there for now, and more later. Alexandria, thanks very much indeed. Alexandria,
thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, let's cross over to Milena Veselinovic, for a look at the economic impact of the war in Iran.
Hello and welcome to Al Jazeera studio in London. Our roundup will look at how motorists are feeling the financial pinch. Now, even though this is a shorter trading week because of Easter in Europe, the markets are still on course for their worst monthly performance in 6 years. Oil prices are now trading at $119 per barrel, following media reports that the US president would be willing to end the war even if the Strait of Hormuz remained closed. And that means motorists faced a so-called war premium, with drivers shelling out an additional $718 million for fuel since the conflict began. And it's a trend playing out across Europe, as Camille Nedelec now reports.
Putting the brakes on prices at the pump. Poland capped fuel prices on Tuesday and has temporarily cut back fuel taxes in a bid to protect drivers from price hikes triggered by the Iran war. A protection that the government wants to extend to Polish drivers only, and not drivers crossing the border purely to fill up.
When we see that this tourism is actually disrupting supply at our stations, and we receive such information from Orlen, the Ministry of State Assets and other entities, we do not rule out a decision to restrict fuel sales to foreigners.
In March, Poland's inflation rate hit its highest level since July. And elsewhere in the Eurozone, it was a similar story. Annual inflation is now expected to be 2.5% in March. In February, it was 1.9%. The main driver of that is energy. According to EU data, prices increased by 4.9%. They had been dropping by more than 3% just the month before. In France, teachers were out of their classrooms and on the streets on Tuesday. Even pre-crisis, they say France's 2026 education budget was not enough.
In our school, it means far more students per class. It also already means that we don't have enough teaching assistants for students with disabilities to cover all the hours. So it means children with disabilities will not have any support. It means teachers who are ill and won't be replaced.
They're against planned job cuts and are demanding better pay. This as the French government's borrowing costs hit a 16-year high. Camille Nedelec, Al Jazeera.
Well, joining us now is Neil Quilliam, an Associate Fellow at Chatham House and a former Senior Middle East and North Africa Energy Advisor at the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Thank you so much for being with us here on set in London. Some worrying reports there from our colleague Camille Nedelec. Can you just expand a little bit on this? We're in week 5 of this war. Markets have been going up and down, in part depending on what Donald Trump has been posting on Truth Social. Do you think at some point we might see some pricing in of this war, pricing in of the volatility?
No, I don't think so. I think we're going to continue with volatility. If one looks at it, you've got 5,000 troops bearing down on the region. We have threats against Karg Island. We have the Iranians promising a response where they will hit water desalination plants, where they further hit energy infrastructure across the region. So there's plenty there, plenty of unknowns, plenty of uncertainty, which is going to keep the price going up and down. So wherever it's sitting today, it's going to be probably a higher price place tomorrow, maybe lower price in 2 days' time. It's just going up and down.
Even more volatility. Well, Neil Quilliam, stay there for a few minutes. I want to get back to you, but first I want to keep us up to date with some statistics. We take a look at the UK fuel prices and consumption. Now, analysis by JP Morgan says the UK will have its last delivery of oil from the Gulf in about 10 days' time. Now, British drivers use 120 million litres of fuel each day, and that's made up of 46 million litres of petrol and 74 million litres of diesel. Now, spending on fuel jumped 10.9% in the week after the war broke out, according to figures from Barclays Bank, showing there was some concern about potential disruption to domestic fuel supplies. And as a result of the war, people are choosing to fill up on fuel rather than book their summer holidays. Now, Edmund King is the president of the Automobile Association in the UK. He joins us now from the organisation's headquarters in Basingstoke. Thank you so much for being with us, sir. Now, first question for me is that motorists, they're already quite heavily taxed across Europe, but especially here in the UK. They will be bearing the brunt of this. What effect do you think this will have on them, considering this war is already being passed, the cost of it being passed down at the pumps?
Yeah, indeed. We've already seen a 20 pence a litre increase in petrol prices, 40p a litre in diesel prices. So that is hitting individuals and hitting the economy. If you think about it, most of our deliveries to the shops are by diesel trucks. Most of our service people use diesel vans. So that really is hitting those self-employed people. And ultimately, those extra costs will just fuel inflation in the UK.
I want to talk to you a little bit about that more, about those self-employed people who rely on these diesel vans for work. So we're talking about delivery drivers, but also people like plumbers, any kind of tradespeople. Do you think that this rise in diesel, particularly the cost of diesel, might then trickle down to consumers? So it might be more expensive to get your plumbing done or get your next day delivery?
Well, I think it will, because the self-employed people just cannot afford to pay 27% more than they did without passing on some of those costs. So there are some things they can do. There is still a great variety of prices. So using things like the AA app, you can check within a mile. The diesel price may vary 13p a litre up to 15p a litre. So you can shop around a bit, you can adjust your driving style, but ultimately it is going to cost these self-employed people a lot of money.
Edmund King, President of the Automobile Association here in the UK, thank you very much for your time and your insights. Now, the pain isn't just for petrol and diesel users. Electric cars, including the famous London black cabs, well, they're not immune either. Sonia Gallego reports.
It's the kind of news that drivers dread to hear. Fuel costs are rising, and for British drivers, there's no easy escape, even in an electric car like this one here. Now, while petrol and diesel cars have been pushed off the road by tougher regulation, going electric doesn't necessarily mean a lower cost. And with me here to talk about that is Steve McNamara, a taxi driver who knows all about that.
The key issue with any electric vehicle, especially taxi drivers, is if you can home charge, they are cheap. If you can't home charge and you're relying on on-street charging, very expensive to run, more so than petrol and diesel.
Now, for high mileage drivers, the cost of charging a vehicle can just add to all of those expenses. Now, while electricity is a way of softening the impact of reliance on fossil fuels, the reality is that it just costs so much more to charge at a public charging point, and that produces its own dilemma for those who are trying to balance out the cost of living. So while an electric vehicle can reduce dependence on fossil fuels, the reality is that it's not necessarily cheaper, especially when a full charge amounts to the cost of a full tank of petrol. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, London.
Well, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is holding an emergency COBRA meeting on Tuesday to discuss the economic fallout of the Iran war on UK households. Energy bills are forecast to rise by almost $400 from July, while motorists are already being hit in the wallet. Let's get more now from Neil Quilliam. I just want to talk to you about this COBRA meeting first that the UK Prime Minister is holding. It's the second emergency meeting that he's chairing in as many days. Yesterday on Monday, he was talking to energy bosses of various companies like BP, like Shell, various logistics and insurance companies. Is there anything that any government, including the UK, can do in conjunction with these companies to alleviate the situation while the strait is still blocked?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that this crisis is going to run for a long time. So we are going to have higher prices for longer. That's number one. Number two, the big levers have already been pulled. We've had the stock release of 400 million barrels. That's been signaled. The US has already sort of repealed the Jones Act. We've seen easing of sanctions on Russian oil and on Iranian oil. So the big levers have been pulled. What the government can do, what the UK government can do, is sort of follow suit with its European partners, and that's cutting duty on fuel. That is targeting support for vulnerable families. That's likely, subsidising public transport. This is a big crisis, and it's going to be around for a long time. So these are only short-term mitigation methods, but there are no long-term methods that the government can really rely upon.
That's quite concerning, Neil. If you stay there for another minute, I just want to update us on some diesel numbers. The UK is heavily dependent on imported diesel, with delivery costs borne by hauliers and delivery drivers. The price of diesel in the UK is now $2.41 per litre, and that's up 53 cents since the start of the war. Now, Neil, can I just also ask you something to do with Donald Trump? He has posted on Truth Social saying that those countries that depend on their oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz should either simply go to Iran and take it or buy it from the US. Now, he's signaling he might be willing to leave this conflict without resolving the Hormuz situation. If that happens, where does it leave countries like the UK and in Europe, in Asia, who do depend on this oil going through?
So it depends. So if that's the case, then the Asian countries, China in particular, may be in a strong position where it can negotiate. We've already seen it negotiate the transit of 3 vessels through Hormuz today. So those with a good relationship, a friendly relationship with Iran, are in a position where they can take advantage of that. Most of the Western countries will not be able to negotiate that or be unwilling to do so. So they are going to be shut out of that deal, shut out of their process. And they cannot simply go to the US. The US cannot make up those supplies. So again, the price of oil is just going to stay up and high for a long time to come.
Neil Quilliam, former senior Middle East and North Africa energy advisor, thank you so much for all of your insights. That's it from me, Milena Veselinovic. Now I'll hand you back to Doha, where there'll be more top news about the Middle East and all of the happenings across the world. Thank you.
Milena, thank you very much for that. Excellent. Going to take a short break now. Don't forget our website, aljazeera.com is the address. Up next, we've got Talk to Al Jazeera coming up with the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And that website, all the comment and analysis that we are covering and all the main stories that we're covering right there. Aljazeera.com is the address. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.
Always Secretary Rubio, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. Let me start by asking you this. Have formal talks begun with Iran, or are these still indirect communications exploring common ground?
Well, there's messages and some direct talks going on between some inside of Iran and the United States, primarily through intermediaries, but there's been some conversation. And I think the president always prefers diplomacy, always prefers an outcome. And we could have done this before. I mean, imagine an Iranian regime who, instead of spending billions of dollars supporting terrorist groups and building up all these weapons, had invested that money into Iran, for the people of Iran, so they wouldn't have water shortages, so their economies would provide opportunities for an incredible people. The people of Iran are incredible people, very resourceful, very entrepreneurial, but it's their regime that's been a problem. And instead, they've chosen to spend the wealth of their country to support Hezbollah and Hamas and Shia militias inside of Iraq, and to try to destabilize Syria when Assad was there. And all over the world to sponsor terrorist plots and build these drones and build these weapons to threaten their neighbors unnecessarily. So we would always welcome a scenario in which Iran was led by people that had a different view of the future and had a different view. And if that opportunity presents itself, we're going to take it.
What are your main demands for Iran at this particular stage of the war?
Iran can never, the Iranian regime can never have nuclear weapons, and they need to stop sponsoring terrorism. And they need to stop building weapons that can threaten their neighbors. These short-range missiles that they're launching, they only have one purpose, and that is to attack Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar and Kuwait and Bahrain. That is the range of these weapons. And they have thousands of them. They've built extraordinary numbers of them, and not to mention, you know, their desire to have this nuclear weapon to threaten and blackmail the world with. That will never be allowed to happen. It's too great a risk.
What would you consider to be the minimum concession from Tehran to bring this conflict to an end?
I think they have to take demonstrable steps towards ending any ambition of having nuclear weapons. If what they want is nuclear energy, there are multiple countries in the region that have or will soon have nuclear energy, and they're going to do it through a well-established mechanism that everyone else has agreed to, and that is that you allow imported fuel to, you import the fuel, and that fuel is used to power up your power grid and provide energy resources for your people. What they cannot have is a system that allows them to quickly weaponize it. They have to stop making all of these drones and all of these missiles. We saw recently where they've lied. They said they didn't have long-range missiles, and then they fired 2 that extended well beyond the range of what their own foreign minister just a few days earlier said they didn't have the range to reach. So they have to abandon all these weapon programs and all of their nuclear ambitions. And if they do that, then Iran's future can be bright. But they have to choose that path, and for 47 years they've refused that path.
Iran said it rejects the US demands and is setting its own conditions, such as the financial compensation and also recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Are those demands acceptable from an American perspective?
Not only is the sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz not acceptable to us, it won't be acceptable to the world. No one in the world can accept it. Number one, it sets an incredible precedent. So this means that nations can now take over international waterways and claim them as their own. The United States could do that now. The Chinese could do it in the South China Sea. No one in the world is going to accept that or should accept that. Now, let me be frank, very little of American energy comes through the Straits of Hormuz in terms of the energy we rely on, but we recognize the impact that it has on global markets and on our neighbors, especially our allies in the region who produce energy and have to get it out to market. So no country in the world should accept it. The regional countries in the world should accept it. The United States will not accept that condition. It's an illegal condition that they're demanding. That's just not going to happen.
As the US-Israeli campaign continues, there's no clear indication that the Strait of Hormuz is secure enough to restart the flow of oil and gas into global markets. Are you consider a plan to ensure full control over the entire strait?
Well, the Straits of Hormuz will be open. When this operation is over, it will be open, and it'll be open one way or another. It will be open because Iran agrees to abide by international law and not block a commercial waterway, or a coalition of nations from around the world and the region, with the participation of the United States, will make sure that it's open. One way or the other, it's going to be open. But we have very clear objectives that we're trying to achieve here. Those objectives are the destruction of their Air Force, which has been achieved, the destruction of their Navy, which has largely been achieved, a significant reduction in the number of missile launchers that they have, which we're well on our way to achieving, and we are going to destroy the factories that make those missiles and those drones that they are using to attack their neighbors and the United States and our presence in the region. We will achieve those objectives. We are well on our way, or ahead of schedule. We will achieve them in weeks, not months. And then we'll be confronted with this issue of the Straits of Hormuz, and it'll be up to Iran to decide. And if they choose to try to block the straits, then they will have to face real consequences, not just from the United States, but from regional countries and from the world.
Your regional allies in the region, their critical energy installations are being bombed, their cities bombed almost on a daily basis, and they're looking for a clear path back to stability. What would be your message to them?
Well, I think the best way to stability, given the people who are in charge in Iran, is to destroy the ability of Iran in the future to launch these missiles and these drones against their infrastructure and civilian populations. If you think about what they've struck in the region, what has Iran gone after? It's been energy infrastructure against countries that were not waging war against them, but yet they went after these countries nonetheless. This is why they built these missiles and drones in the first place. But they've also attacked embassies, diplomatic facilities, which is unheard of. They've attacked airports, which is unheard of. This is what they've done. And this is a weakened Iran. This is an Iran that's weaker than it's been in 10 years. Imagine 5 years from now or 3 years from now, when they had more missiles, more drones, what they would have been willing to do to their neighbors and to us. That was intolerable. That's why this needed to be done now. The United States is committed to finishing the job. We're working very closely with all of our allies, work very closely in defensive. Yes, unfortunately, drones and missiles get through from time to time, but the overwhelming majority of these launches are defeated. They're shot down before they reach their intended target, or the destruction would be far worse. These are strong, stable countries in the region. These are our allies. These are our friends. And we are going to continue to be there and support them as they face this onslaught. And by the way, they're not the ones, Iran is targeting them in retribution, which tells you the nature of the people we're dealing with, unfortunately.
But it seems that the Strait of Hormuz is not going to be the only focal point for you, because with the Houthis stepping in and firing missiles into Israel, Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea could become issues that you will have to reconsider.
It could, and look, that's been an ongoing issue. And when they did that, the United States took action against it as well, and many of our regional allies have had to do so in the past. It's the desire, whether it's the Houthis on one side or Iran on the other, to close these international waterways and create a toll road where basically you have to ask for their permission in order to use them and get your products in or out of market. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable to us, but it should be unacceptable to the world. And I think it's important, and I'm glad to see the effort Bahrain is leading in the United Nations, which we've been very supportive of, to get an international coalition that says we will not accept a world and where either the Iranians on one side or the Houthis on the other get to control international waterways and impede the free flow of goods from nation states. That's just not something we're going to accept, neither should the world.
Do you have any issues with Mujtaba Khamenei staying in power once this is over, and the IRGC continuing to play the crucial role it plays now?
Well, let me say, first of all, we don't even know if he's in power. I know they say he's in power. No one has seen him. No one has heard from him. It's very opaque right now. It's not quite clear how decisions are being made inside of Iran. But our objectives here from the very beginning had nothing to do with the leadership. But would we love to see a difference? Do we think the people of Iran deserve better leadership than what they've gotten from the clerical regime? 100%. Would we be heartbroken if there was a change in leadership? Absolutely not. If there's something we could do to facilitate that, would we be interested in participating? Of course. But that was not the objective of this operation. The objective of this operation was, which I outlined now and the President outlined clearly on the first night, is the destruction of their Air Force, which we've achieved, the destruction of their Navy, which we've largely achieved, the destruction of their factories, which we are well on our way to achieving, meaning factories that make these weapons, and significantly reducing the number of missile launchers that they have so they can't continue to threaten their neighbors and America. Those were our objectives. That's what we're focused on, and that's what we are well on our way towards achieving.
Are you fully aligned with the Israelis when it comes to the objectives and the end game?
Well, they have a different objective in terms of they are focused on the mid-range missiles in the northern part of Iran that target them. And obviously we coordinate and deconflict with them in terms of our operations, but what they are focused on is different. We're not critical of it. Those things are threats to them. Those mid-range missiles that Iran launches that reach into Israel, those are threats that they're facing. They're also facing a threat from Hezbollah, which they're confronting as well. So they have their own objectives. We deconflict so that our objectives and theirs don't run into each other. But the President has, for the United States of America, has established a very clear mission, which we're executing on, and we will achieve our objectives in a matter of weeks.
Do you believe the EU and NATO countries betrayed the US at this crucial moment?
I think it was very disappointing. You have this, and again, look, the President and our country will have to re-examine all of this after this operation is over. But one of the reasons why NATO is beneficial to the United States is it gives us basing rights for contingencies. It allows us to station troops and aircraft and weapons and in parts of the world that we would normally have bases, and that includes in much of Europe. And to see that in a time of need, the United States has identified a grave risk to our national security and our national interests, and we needed to conduct this operation. And we have countries like Spain, a NATO member, that we are pledged to defend, denying us the use of their airspace and bragging about it, denying us the use of their bases. And there are other countries that have done that as well. And so you ask yourself, well, what is in it for the United States? And I've been a big supporter of NATO. And one of the reasons why I've been a supporter of NATO is because I believe that these basing rights give us leverage and give us flexibility and operational capability all over the world. But if NATO is just about us defending Europe if they're attacked, but them denying us basing rights when we need them, that's not a very good arrangement. That's a hard one to stay engaged in and say this is good for the United States. So all of them's going to have to be re-examined. All of it's going to have to be re-examined.
I've recently spent some time in Europe, and basically what they say is that it's the US which is sending confusing messages to us. It's the US which is planning to disengage from Europe. It's the US which doesn't seem to be really willing to team up with NATO when it comes to moving forward in Europe. And this explains the reason why we have been very cautious dealing with the Americans when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz in particular.
Well, if that's what someone in Europe told you, that person's very disingenuous, because the United States has tens of thousands of troops stationed throughout that region, billions of dollars of weaponry staged throughout Europe. All of it there to defend Europe, not to defend America, to defend Europe from attack, okay, all over. The United States is, without the United States, there is no NATO. I mean, everyone recognizes that, including NATO. If we decided tomorrow that we were going to remove our troops from Europe, that would be the end of NATO. So they know that. And that commitment, we haven't moved troops out of NATO. So anyone who said that's not being honest or is not, I think they're playing games. At the end of the day, it's very simple. NATO is an alliance, and an alliance means it has to be mutually beneficial. It cannot be a one-way street. Let's hope we can fix it. We'll have time to address it after. Right now, we're focused on this operation.
Let's move on to something else. I would like to talk to you about Venezuela after the capture of President Nicolas Maduro. Could you tell us more about your plans for Venezuela in the future?
I think it's moving along very well. We said it from the very first day after that operation happened. I said our hope is, number one, to stabilize the country. We didn't want to see civil war. We didn't want to see systemic collapse. We didn't want to see a mass migration event. You've seen none of these things. What you've seen is that for the first time in decades, Venezuela is now selling their oil in the global market at full market price, and the money is coming back to Venezuela and being spent for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. It's being spent to buy medical goods and equipment. It's being spent to cover the salaries of teachers and police officers and civil servants and people that, sanitation workers and things of this nature. So it's a very important part. The second phase, after the stabilization occurs, or concurrent with the stabilization, is a period of recovery in which you try to recover the elements of the country that allow it to prosper and grow, and that is attracting businesses back, creating the kind of stability that bring businesses back. We're seeing that begin to happen. But you're also seeing civil life come back to life. Independent media is now allowed to operate. Political prisoners have been released. Political parties are forming again. People are speaking and participating in public life. And finally, you want to see a full transition. Because in order for Venezuela to fulfill its economic potential, it has to have a stable democratic government that people are willing to invest in that economy because they know that they're protected by laws and courts and legitimacy. So we are well on our way to achieving this. A lot of credit goes to the interim authorities who have assumed this responsibility. We've reopened our embassy. We enter in dialogue with them every single day. We feel very positive about it.
Many assume Washington will focus on Cuba next once the war is over in the Middle East. What kind of decisions or policy would you would like to see in place for potential regime change?
Yeah, look, we don't need anything from Cuba, to be honest with you. I mean, Cuba needs from us, we don't need from Cuba. What I mean by Cuba, I mean it's their regime. The problem Cuba has, it's a very fundamental problem, and they need to understand it, and we've tried to explain it to anyone who will listen. Their system doesn't work. Their system of economics, I can't even describe it, but it's completely dysfunctional. It's just not a real system. And you can't change it unless you change the government. As an example, a week ago they said, well, Cuban Americans can now invest on the island. Invest in what? Invest in a country that has arbitrary laws, no established system of courts and justice. Who's going to invest in something like that? You also can't have economic prosperity without some significant level of political freedom. If I'm going to participate in the economic life of a country and I don't like the regulations or the rules that government is putting in place that are hampering me, I have to have the ability to complain about that. And in that country, you can't complain about that or you'll be put in jail. So I think Cuba needs to make, and if Cuba really wants to emerge from the hole they've put themselves in, meaning the regime has put them in, they really need to undertake very serious reforms of both their government and of their economy. And if they're willing to do so, we're going to help them. We've done nothing punitive against the Cuban regime. They claim we have, but we haven't. The only thing that's changed for the Cuban regime is they're not getting free Venezuelan oil anymore. They're not getting subsidies anymore. That's the only thing that's changed. These blackouts that are occurring that I see people reporting have nothing to do with us. They were having blackouts last year. They're having blackouts because they have equipment from the 1950s in their grid that they've never maintained and never upgraded because they're incompetent. That's why they're having blackouts.
So Adil, my last question, if you don't mind. Do you have any sense of clarity about when the war is going to be over in the Middle East?
The operation in Iran, as soon as we achieve our objectives, as I've outlined them repeatedly, and that is we've destroyed their Navy, we've destroyed their Air Force, we are well on our way to destroying the majority of their arms factories, and we're well on our way to significantly degrading their missile launchers. When those objectives are achieved, we will have achieved the purpose of this operation, and that's something that's not going to take months. That's a matter of weeks. I'm not going to tell you exactly how many weeks, but a matter of weeks, not months.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.